The altimeter screamed past 12,000 feet, and Vivian Castellane's main chute tore away from her shoulders like paper in a hurricane, leaving her tumbling through empty blue sky with nothing but a malfunctioning reserve and 40 seconds left to live. She had jumped to celebrate closing the biggest acquisition of her career, the deal that made her, at 38, the youngest CEO in her company's history. Now the sky that had felt like freedom seconds ago became a roaring, indifferent void, and the only sound louder than the wind was the frantic pounding of her own heart as she yanked the reserve handle and felt it catch, then stutter, then fail to fully deploy. The fabric twisted into a useless tangle above her, and the ground below stopped looking like a green and brown quilt and started looking like a place she was about to die. If this story already has your heart racing, hit that like button right now, drop a comment telling me you believe in second chances, share this with someone who needs a little hope today, and subscribe to Wisdom Story House, because what happens next will remind you why some strangers become the most important people in our lives. 3,000 feet below, Marcus Holloway was making his 400th jump of the season, the kind of routine Tuesday afternoon dive he did to clear his head after dropping his 6-year-old daughter, Junebug, at his sister's house for the day. Marcus wasn't supposed to be working a tandem shift today. He'd taken the day off, just for himself, just to feel the wind and remember what it was like to be a person and not only a father scrambling to hold a life together since his wife passed 2 years earlier. He was 3 jumps deep into his own private therapy session when he heard the emergency channel crackle to life in his helmet radio, a voice from the plane shouting coordinates and a single desperate sentence: jumper in freefall, chute failure, reserve tangled, she is going to hit the ground. Marcus didn't think. He didn't calculate the odds or consider that intercepting a falling body from a different altitude and trajectory was something that simply wasn't done, not by sane people, not by anyone who had a daughter waiting for him at home. He simply rolled his body into a dive, tracking hard toward the falling shape he could now see growing larger against the patchwork earth, a woman spinning slowly, her arms flailing in instinctive, useless attempts to find purchase in nothing. The math of it should have been impossible. Closing that kind of distance in freefall required matching trajectory, speed, and angle within seconds, and Marcus had maybe 20 of those seconds left before either he caught her or watched her die in front of him. He pulled his body into the steepest dive he had ever attempted, arms tight against his sides, and felt the altitude eating itself alive beneath him. The woman's face came into view, eyes wide with a terror that had passed through panic and into something quieter and more devastating, a kind of resigned goodbye. He reached her at 4,000 feet. His gloved hand closed around her wrist with a violence that would leave bruises for weeks, and he pulled her into his body, wrapping his legs around hers, forcing her tangled reserve away from them both before it could wrap around his own lines. She screamed something he couldn't hear over the wind, and he screamed back the only words that mattered: "I have you, breathe, I have you." His own chute was still strapped to his back, untouched, and now he had to deploy it while holding the full weight of a terrified stranger against his chest, at an altitude that was disappearing far too fast. He pulled his cord at 2,000 feet, lower than any instructor would ever recommend, because he needed every possible second to stabilize their fall first. The canopy snapped open with a crack that felt like the sky itself had exhaled, and the brutal deceleration nearly tore Vivian from his arms, her body slamming against his harness as the straps bit into both of them. For 3 or 4 seconds neither of them breathed. Then the world slowed from a scream to a drift, and Marcus Holloway found himself floating gently toward a field of wildflowers with a sobbing, shaking CEO crushed against his chest, both of them alive in a way that felt less like luck and more like a miracle neither could yet name. They landed hard but upright, rolling together into the grass, and for a long moment Vivian simply lay there, fingers digging into the fabric of his jumpsuit, unable to speak, unable to process that the ground beneath her was real and solid and not a thing she would die against. When she finally found her voice, it came out broken and small, nothing like the voice she used to close 9-figure deals. She asked him why. Why would a stranger risk his life, his daughter's father, for someone he had never met? Marcus, still catching his own breath, told her the truth, that he had a little girl who had already lost her mother, and he could not live with himself knowing he'd watched someone's daughter or sister or mother fall to her death when he had the chance to do something. He said it so simply, so without performance, that Vivian began to cry harder than she had during the fall itself. The days that followed unraveled something in Vivian that her entire curated, achievement-driven life had kept buried. She visited Marcus at the small drop zone where he worked, ostensibly to thank him properly, to offer him money he firmly refused, and found herself instead sitting in his cluttered kitchen while Junebug showed her a drawing of the lady Daddy caught from the sky. She watched Marcus make grilled cheese with the exhausted, automatic love of a man who had been doing everything alone for 2 years, who had built an entire small universe of routine and sacrifice around a child who didn't yet understand how much her father had given up to keep her world steady. Vivian, who ran board meetings without blinking, found herself unable to speak around the lump in her throat watching this. She started coming back. Not out of obligation, and not, she realized slowly, out of mere gratitude either. She came back because something about the quiet honesty of Marcus's life, stripped of pretense and ambition and corporate armor, made her own life look suddenly hollow by comparison. She had spent 15 years building a company and had nearly died without a single person in her personal life who would have jumped after her. Marcus had built nothing the world would call impressive, and yet he had a daughter who adored him and a community of fellow jumpers who spoke of him like he was the best man any of them knew. Vivian began quietly restructuring her own life. She handed more responsibility to her leadership team. She started showing up at Junebug school recitals, sitting in folding chairs in gymnasiums, clapping too loud, feeling something unclench in her chest each time. She and Marcus never rushed anything. The bond between them had been forged in genuine terror and gratitude, and they both knew better than to mistake that intensity for something it wasn't. But slowly, over months, dinners turned into routines, routines turned into trust, and trust turned into the kind of quiet, steady love that doesn't announce itself with fireworks but simply becomes the architecture of a life. A year after the fall, Vivian stood at the edge of that same drop zone, harness on, hand trembling slightly, preparing to jump again, this time with Marcus beside her and Junebug watching proudly from the ground with sunglasses too big for her face. Vivian had told the board she was taking a sabbatical, that for the first time in her adult life she wanted to know who she was when she wasn't achieving something. Marcus had told his daughter that sometimes the sky gives you exactly what you need, even when it tries to take everything first. If this story moved you even a little, if you believe that the right stranger can change the entire direction of a life, please take just a moment to comment below and tell me what part touched you most, because I read every single one and your words mean more than you know. Before we close this chapter, I want to ask something special of you. Type the words, "I believe in second chances," in the comments right now, so that everyone scrolling through can see how many hearts this story has touched today. Vivian Castellane never became someone who feared the sky again. Instead, she became someone who understood that falling, sometimes, is simply the universe's way of finally getting your attention, of forcing you to notice the parts of your life you had been too busy to see. She had built an empire from 12,000 feet up, but it took a single father with calloused hands and a 6-year-old's drawing taped to his refrigerator to teach her what it actually felt like to be caught, to be safe, to be loved without conditions or quarterly returns. And every single time she watched Marcus tuck Junebug into bed at night, murmuring the same gentle words he'd once shouted into the wind to save her life, she understood that some falls aren't endings at all. Sometimes, they're simply the beginning of the only life worth landing in.